So it was the Times Crossword Championship on Saturday, and what an amazing day. I made it through to the grand final of three people, which is way beyond what I possibly expected. I have been entering the Times Crossword Championship for 30 or 40 years and usually finish very solidly in the middle of the field. I'm simply not a speed solver. I've never aimed to be as fast as possible, and I can't get out of the habit of fully passing a clue before I move on to the next clue, which I feel probably does cost me a certain amount of speed. But I felt that even if I did try and shave a few corners, there are so many people who are massively faster than me that there is no point, and I might as well just enjoy the day out. But unbelievably, on Saturday, I did make it through to the grand final. The first morning session, 120 people, was whittled down to 60, and I was the 20th fastest all correct solver, so pretty par for the course in terms of being middle of the field. But then in the afternoon session, where the puzzles were slightly harder, somehow I managed to be the 5th fastest solver, and two of the people who were above me had made a single error in their puzzle and were therefore knocked back further down the field. So that's how I ended up in the final against Matthew Marcus and Peter Stegel. It was a single puzzle shootout, 30 minutes, and not surprisingly, it was very hard. And that's the way I expected it to be and also wanted it to be. I was never going to win on speed. The best I could hope for was a really hard puzzle, which everyone was struggling with, and that's certainly how it transpired. After 14 minutes, after 14 minutes, Peter held his puzzle up, and I had still got about half the puzzle to go. And then after 19 minutes, Matthew held his puzzle up, and, well, I still hadn't finished. And with about 10 minutes to go, this is the situation I was in. I still had 5 clues to go, and I had hit a brick wall. And this sometimes happens when you have a number of interlocking clues. You've looked at all of them, and you simply can't make progress. And ordinarily when that happens, I just take a deep breath and go through them in order and relax and wait for my subconscious to come up with a suggestion or solve a clue. And certainly that's the method I went through on this puzzle, but either because the puzzle was so hard or because my subconscious was not properly working because of emotions and conscious thoughts, then the brick wall actually lasted for a period of about 6 minutes, which is very long. So with about 4 minutes to go, this was still the situation, and my breakthrough came with 17 across. So is a hip eccentric, always dropping one thing for another? I can't tell you how many times I read this clue during the course of trying to solve it, but I just wasn't making any progress. And then I thought, well, eccentric surely has to be an anagram indicator, and it has to apply to is a hip. That's got too many letters. And just reading on, always dropping one. Pause. And that's when the penny dropped, because there are 2 ones or I's in is a hip. If you get rid of them, if you drop them, you're left with 4 letters, which can be anagrammed into pash, which is short for passion, which is when you have a thing for another, when you fancy somebody. And this unlocked the doors to the remaining clues, because 8 down, another phenomenally difficult clue, where Amber runs, dashing Romeo by her side. And normally when you're solving clues, you certainly, if you're good at cryptic crosswords, what you do is you very, very quickly identify the definition, and quite often that's all you need to solve the clue, with the wordplay simply corroborating what you think is true from the definition. But with really hard clues like this one, it is very hard to identify what the definition is. However, the clue begins with the word where, so you may be looking for a place, and as soon as I had the H in from Pash, I was thinking, well, maybe it ends Shire. And having thought about Shire, I then noticed that side by her contains those letters. realised that dashing was an anagram indicator. Romeo could be R in the native phonetic alphabet, and R by her side had exactly 10 letters, and that was enough to get Derbyshire. And after getting Derbyshire, the penny then drops that there must be a river called Amber which flows in Derbyshire. So I now look at clue 5 across, £5 bit, which again I had looked at about 20 times and still drew a blank. Then had a look at, it's then creates a false impression that I'm working my way through this methodically. What I'm doing is flickering between the remaining unsolved clues, hoping for a breakthrough, which simply wasn't happening. And I can't remember which of these two I got first, but 4 down, this is really infuriating, because when I first read this, my first thought was Home is a reference to Alec Douglas Home, or Hume, who was a British Prime Minister. And that was my first thought when I saw Home, and I just couldn't get the rest of the clue to work. And my only thought now is that this is an and-lit clue, and I think and-lit clues are hard to solve under pressure, because under pressure what you're looking to do is definition wordplay, whereas if you're approaching this in a more relaxed fashion, you entertain the possibility of it being an and-lit, which is what this is. So I can't remember whether I got tramp or the next clue first. However, and I'm not sure if I fully passed tramp either, but it felt like it was one of very few clues which worked. And the clue, Home for one, a poor tent finally put up. This word finally is an indicator of the final letter. And when you've got tent finally put up and you see this T, you think that's what it's referring to. But then if you go back one word and you've got poor tent finally, the finally could relate to both of those, which is the R and the A. So I think I had TRA in mind, and at that point went for tramp, which also seemed to vaguely fit the overall vibe of the clue. Not that that's how I normally solve clues, but without realising it was an and-lit, a tramp might live in a poor tent. And in fact, afterwards looking at this clue, it's an excellent clue. It is an and-lit. Home for one is PM, A is A, poor tent finally is R and T, and then put up refers to all of that as a reversal indicator. And then you then read it as a literal definition, with one referring to the answer. So home for a tramp, a poor tent finally put up. And a tramp might live in a poor tent rather than a good quality tent, because they're a tramp and they don't have the resources to have a posh tent. And then finally put up again would indicate that a tramp might have difficulty putting up a poor quality tent. So I think the whole thing does work as a definition. So certainly with this P in, 13 across finally becomes fairly straightforward, because hand study notes in miserable. I think I needed all these letters in to get the definition to work, and notes in miserable looks like a word play which I got nowhere with. But hand study isn't. I was thinking the study of handwriting, which I forget what that is, but it certainly didn't fit this letter pattern or the letter pattern at any point. But then I see that palmistry fits, and of course fortune telling by reading hands is palmistry. So having got the definition, I could then see that notes were me's, do, re, fa, me, me's in miserable in poultry, and that miserable equaling poultry is a synonym that I simply didn't get until after I got the whole word in, and that's contributed to the slowness of this solve. So at this point, the entire puzzle is solved apart from 5 across. I don't know how much time I've got left. There is a clock ticking on a giant screen, but it's behind me, and I don't know whether it was embarrassment or some other reason, but I didn't feel like looking behind me to see how much time I had left. So I think if I'd seen that the clock was ticking down to 30, I would have shoved something in. But as it is, I spent the unknown remaining minutes, which I think I recognised were very limited, trying to solve this and failing. So £5 bit, blank E, blank T, blank D. Very, very hard, because 5, well, you think V for Roman numerals, and that's it. That exhausts my list of word plays which 5 can be. It's V, and vented and vested doesn't make any sense for what's left, because ented and ested aren't words, certainly not words meaning pound. And then you look at pound and you think, well, L, could it be a word meaning 5 which begins with L? And of course it isn't. So I drew a complete blank on this, but I think this is another clue where it was the occasion which got to me, because I think ordinarily if I was solving this, I think my thoughts would around 5 would be, well, what are things which have got 5 connected with them? Well, you have pentagons and quintuples, so the Greek and Latin prefixes which indicate 5, and in this instance it is one of those which works. And you have pentad, which is a synonym for 5. Now, I haven't checked the dictionary, so I don't know if pentad literally means 5, or whether 5 in the clue is acceptable for 5 items. I don't know what a pentad is. I know it exists as a word, an anagram of pedant, but 5 is the definition for pentad. Pound is pen, as in somewhere where you keep animals, and bit is tad, which has come up a lot in crosswords, or does come up a lot in crosswords, and I should have considered that, especially when I had T blank D. But I think bit being a possible past tense of bite, and the word ending T blank D, I mean, this is just superb clue construction. It really makes you think that it ends T-E-D, and of course when you go down a wrong track you're never going to get the right answer. So it was pentad which did for me, and one's left with a feeling of being so close. It looks like you're miles behind, because the winner finishes all correct in 19, somebody else finishes in 14 minutes, but the 14-minute person, although way ahead of me on time, also made just the one error. They misspelt Ulan Bator. I'm not quite sure how Peter misspelt it, but he leant across to me straight after I had finished and whispered that he'd made an error. So I knew I was level with him on numbers of errors, but I could only overtake him if he had made more than one error, which of course he hadn't. So it was super close. Matthew finished first with no errors and a stunning performance solving this puzzle in under 20 minutes. Peter was second with a single error of Ulan Bator, and I was third with a single error of pentad, but of course miles behind on time. But it's such fine margins. If Matthew had made just one error, and if I had shoved in pentad as a guess right at the end, then I would have won. So I feel that was fairly close. But fine margins count for a lot when you're working at the very highest level of either crosswords or Scrabble, and it contributes to your memories of the game, and in all levels of sport and activity. When you're playing at an elite level, fine margins are critical. But this was absolutely tremendous puzzle. Every single clue was hard won. I think I got Minx in straight away and thought that I was pleased to get a difficult clue straight off, but that was a false dawn, as I then struggled with, I think, every other clue. But it was absolutely beautiful, and I was delighted actually to not to have half the grid empty after 30 minutes. That doesn't normally happen when I solve, but that was the feeling I got as I was wading through this. It was like it was like wading through treacle, but it's not in any way to criticise the puzzle, which is absolutely beautiful. And just looking at Ulan Bator, because it's just an example of how beautiful this puzzle is. City is the definition. Ulan Bator is the capital of Mongolia. I think it's spelt in the modern way with the local spelling of UL followed by 8 A's, then an N and another 16 A's randomly distributed towards the end of the word. But certainly in olden times or older times it was spelt this way, Ulan Bator. Unfortunately, that's the way I remember it. And the wordplay works, or I think is just a linking word. United is you. That's a standard crosswording abbreviation. To be in is a cricketing reference for bat. That is brutal. That is absolutely brutal. When you see to be in the context of wordplay, you're thinking of some letters being inside some other letters. But in this instance, to be in is a reference purely to the word bat, and obviously completely fair. Yellow is OR, the heraldic tincture. And then to secure or to contain, win mostly. To win is to land, mostly means without its last letter. So U, bat and or around land without its D gives Ulaanbaatar, which is a city. And that's just to give you a flavour of how brutally hard this puzzle is. And I could do the same exercise, or one could do the same exercise with every clue, and they're all super high quality. So it's an absolute privilege to be part of the grand final when this was the puzzle that we were trying to solve against the clock and in front of a live audience. Absolutely fantastic stuff. I may never reach the grand final again, but this was my day in the sun and I thoroughly enjoyed it.